Long ago, in London, there lived the Darling family. Mr. and Mrs. Darling had 3 little children. Wendy was the eldest, followed by John and little Michael. The children loved bedtime stories, especially stories about Peter Pan, the boy who would not grow up, and his adventures with pirates and mermaids. Oh, how the children wished to meet Peter Pan someday. Little did the children know that their wish was soon to be granted. Peter Pan was flying by the bedroom window one night when he heard Mrs. Darling telling the kids of his exploits. Peter was delighted and sat just outside the window to listen. As soon as Mrs. Darling turned off the light and the children were asleep, Peter opened the bedroom window and crept in. The room was very dark, and Peter bumped into one of the night tables, waking Wendy. Wendy sat up, but Peter had already escaped through the window. However, Peter had left something behind. His mischievous shadow. His shadow never clung to Peter's body and was always trying to get away from Peter. Wendy, who had switched on the lights, was taken aback to find a strange shadow in her bedroom. She examined it for a moment and then exclaimed, "Why, this shadow looks like it belongs to Peter Pan!" She carefully folded the shadow up and put it inside a drawer, hoping that Peter might return looking for it. The next morning, Wendy told Michael and John what had happened the previous night. Their mouths gaped open in excitement. The next night, Wendy could barely sleep. She was sure that Peter would come to their house again. She was right, for later that night, Peter returned, accompanied by his best friend, a tiny fairy named Tinker Bell. When Wendy saw Peter, she jumped out of bed. Peter had not expected this and was about to dash out the window again when Wendy stopped him. Excitedly, she introduced herself and explained how she had saved his shadow. Wendy asked Peter to sit on the bed, and she stitched Peter's shadow back onto his body. Peter was delighted. He invited Wendy to come along with him to Neverland. Wendy couldn't believe her ears. Neverland! She enthusiastically agreed, but told Peter that she couldn't go without her brothers. Wendy shook them from their beds. "John! Michael! Wake up! Peter Pan is here," she said. "We're going to Neverland." John and Michael could not believe what they were seeing. Peter Pan was in their room. Peter grabbed Tinker Bell and sprinkled pixie dust on his new friends. "Think of a happy thought," he told them, "and you can fly too." Peter and Tinker Bell led the 3 children out the window, and they flew over the rooftops of London and off to Neverland. They flew for many hours. Wendy, John, and Michael had to pinch themselves to remember that they weren't in a dream. The island of Neverland was soon before them. First, Peter took them to the place where he lived with his friends, the Lost Boys. Peter told the boys that Wendy was going to be their mother and would tell them wonderful stories every night. The boys cheered. They had always wanted a mother. The next day, Peter took Wendy on a tour of the island. He showed her the ship of the notorious Captain Hook, a dangerous pirate who hated children. Long ago, A crocodile had eaten one of Captain Hook's hands, and the captain used a hook to replace it, giving him the name Captain Hook. That crocodile, however, found Hook's hand so delicious that he had been following Hook ever since, anxious to eat the rest of him. Luckily for Hook, the crocodile had also swallowed an alarm clock, and one could always tell when he was near because of the tick-tock sound coming from his stomach. Peter then took Wendy to the lagoon. A large waterfall splashed into the pool, and mermaids sat on rocks, listening to the singing of the birds. Peter introduced Wendy to his friends. Wendy was thrilled to meet real live mermaids. Suddenly, their peace was interrupted by a loud, harsh voice. It was, of course, the voice of the wicked Captain Hook. Peter and Wendy hid in a nearby bush and saw Captain Hook and his men passing by with a young girl as their prisoner. Peter informed Wendy that that was no ordinary girl, but Princess Tigerlily. Hook told Tigerlily that unless she revealed where Peter Pan's hideout was, she would be tied to a rock as the tide came in and left to drown. Tigerlily refused to tell him anything, so Hook told his men to tie her to the rock. He bid her goodbye and went back to his ship. That was when Peter had a brilliant idea. Staying hidden, he imitated Hook's voice and told the pirates to release Tigerlily and go back to the ship. Hook's men were utterly confused, but afraid to defy their captain. They did as they were told. They untied Tigerlily and left. Tigerlily was also confused, but once she saw Peter and Wendy come out of the bush, she understood what Peter had done. She invited them back to her village, where there would be a great celebration in Peter's honor. Later that night, after their celebration, Wendy told a bedtime story to the lost boys. She told them about 3 children who had left their mother and father to travel to a faraway land. She also told them how homesick the children were, even though they were having a wonderful time. Everyone understood that Wendy was talking about herself and her 2 brothers. Wendy, John, and Michael knew it was time to go home. Wendy asked Peter, Tinker Bell, and the lost boys to come along with them to London, where she would help them find mothers. Peter refused. If he went to live in London, he would grow up, and Peter Pan did not want to grow up. The next day, the children and the lost boys started off for London. But as soon as they set sail, they were captured by Captain Hook. Tinker Bell flew back to tell Peter what had happened. Peter flew to the pirate ship and hid behind one of the sails. Then he imitated the tick-tock sound of the crocodile. Nothing scared Captain Hook more than the crocodile. Hook shook with fear, and Peter swooped down with his sword. Hook and Peter fought, their rapiers gleaming in the sunlight. Hook lunged at Peter with his sword, but Peter stepped out of the way and Hook fell into the ocean. Guess who just happened to be waiting for Hook in the water? The crocodile, of course! The crocodile chased Hook out into the open sea. The children cheered, and Hook was never heard from again. It was time to go home, and Peter knew his friends must return to London. He whispered something to Tinker Bell, and the little fairy flew over the pirate ship, sprinkling pixie dust as she went. The children gasped as the ship suddenly lifted into the air. Peter captained his friends back to London and right back to their bedroom window. Wendy, John, and Michael were happy to be reunited with their parents. The lost boys soon found parents too. Time passed, and eventually they grew up and had children of their own. Every night, after Wendy had read bedtime stories to her children, she would leave their bedroom window open just in case Peter Pan was near.